I never imagined that my father, the same man who once told me to never make a scene, would one day raise his hand to strike my daughter. And not in private, but in front of over 200 wedding guests under the glow of string lights and the sound of an open microphone. My name is Rachel. I'm 36 years old, and I've spent most of my life carefully managing the boundaries between myself and my family. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened at my sister's wedding. It was supposed to be a joyful day. Charlotte, my younger sister, was marrying a kind young doctor named Ryan. The ceremony was held at a beautiful vineyard just outside our hometown in Michigan. Everything about it was elegant and meticulous, from the white roses wrapped around the gazebo to the imported linen tablecloths. My 6-year-old daughter, Emma, wore a pale yellow dress with tiny sunflowers printed across the hem. She had insisted on wearing her sparkly shoes, even though they didn't match. I let her. It was her aunt's big day, and she was excited. I had just finished giving a short toast during the reception. I kept it light, recalled an embarrassing but sweet childhood story about Charlotte and me. It was the kind of speech people smiled through, nothing controversial. But right as I ended my toast and guests chuckled, Emma let out a burst of laughter from her seat in the front row. Loud, full of joy, and completely unfiltered the way only a 6-year-old can laugh. My father turned around, his expression like stone. He walked toward her with deliberate steps. Before I could move, before anyone could understand what was happening, he raised his hand. Show some dignity, he snapped loud enough for the microphone to pick up. This is not a circus. He didn't strike her. I got there first. I reached out and caught his wrist just as his hand started to descend. The crowd fell completely silent. Emma shrank back into her chair, wide-eyed. My hand was still on his wrist, the veins on his hand bulging knuckles white. The silence was louder than any slap could have been. "You don't touch her," I said, my voice shaking but firm. Behind us, the DJ's equipment sat still. Microphones were hot. The videographer was still filming. The camera didn't flinch even when everyone else did. He looked at me like I'd betrayed him, like I was the one embarrassing the family. And in that moment, with my heart pounding, I knew something had changed. This wasn't just another uncomfortable family incident to be swept under the rug. This was a line crossed, and it would not be forgotten. This was how it began. My name is Rachel Palmer. I'm a single mother, a school librarian, and the eldest daughter in a family that doesn't believe in softness. I'm not extraordinary. I'm not particularly brave. But I've learned to survive by staying quiet, by not drawing attention, by folding myself into corners when my voice wasn't welcome. I didn't always know how much that had shaped me until I had Emma. Emma is 6 years old with wild curls and a laugh that bounces off every wall it meets. She has this untamed joy about her, the kind of happiness that hasn't yet learned to shrink. She sings when she brushes her teeth. She giggles in movie theaters. She asks loud questions in grocery store lines. And she's never once apologized for existing. I didn't realize how rare that was until my father called her a disruption. My father is Thomas Palmer, a retired professor of economics, who still wears a tie to breakfast and never once said "I'm sorry" that I can remember. He's the kind of man who believes in hard work, rigid order, and a well-kept lawn. He talks about honor and discipline like their currency, and he expects the same from everyone around him, especially his children. He used to tell me that I was too sensitive, that I read too much into things, that I needed to toughen up if I wanted to make it in this world. But toughness in his world meant silence. It meant obedience. My mother Diane is quieter in her judgments, but just as firm in her expectations. She believes in peace at any cost, even if that peace requires pretending nothing is wrong. She never raised her voice, but she never raised her hand to stop what shouldn't have happened either. She believed in not making a scene, and I followed that lead for most of my life. Then there's Charlotte, my younger sister, and the golden child of the Palmer family. She's 6 years younger than me and was always better at being what they wanted. Polished, cheerful, effortlessly graceful. The kind of person who makes good impressions in every room she walks into. Our parents praised her constantly, her grades, her poise, the way she never talked back. I was the moody one, the emotional one, the one who read too many novels and asked too many questions. By the time I was old enough to see the patterns, the roles had already hardened. Charlotte was pride. I was patience. Still, I never resented her. Not really. She didn't create the roles. She just played hers very well. When Charlotte announced she was getting married, I was genuinely happy for her. She and Ryan seemed like a good match. He was kind, mild-mannered, and came from a quiet religious family that believed in Sunday dinners and polite conversation. The wedding was to be a formal event at a vineyard with over 200 guests, a string quartet, and a live videographer team to capture everything. I hadn't been to a family event in years, not since Emma was born. Our visits had always been brief and strained. My father believed I'd made poor choices getting married too young, leaving my husband when the relationship turned cold, and controlling, choosing a part-time job that paid less instead of chasing a career. He never said it outright, but he didn't have to. I wasn't a disappointment. I was simply what happens when a daughter thinks for herself. Still, I brought Emma to the wedding. She'd only met her grandparents a handful of times, but she was excited about the idea of dressing up and seeing her Aunt Charlotte in a princess dress. I told myself it would be fine, that I could manage a few days of polite small talk and tight smiles, that the past could stay folded up in the back pocket of my memory. I didn't expect it to be easy. I just didn't expect it to repeat. Emma is everything I wasn't allowed to be as a child, free, loud, unfiltered. She dances in grocery store aisles. She interrupts conversations when she has something important to say. She feels things deeply and lets you know. And I've made it my life's mission to protect that spark in her. But standing there, in the middle of the wedding reception, watching my father's hand move toward her, I saw my childhood flicker in front of me like a slide reel. I saw the look in Emma's eyes, the sudden confusion, the shame blooming where joy had just been. And I realized I had brought her straight into the same storm I spent my whole life trying to outrun. It started with a laugh. After I finished my toast at the wedding reception, the guests gave polite applause. I stepped down from the podium, flushed and relieved. Public speaking was never something I enjoyed, especially not in front of my father, who had once corrected my grammar during a eulogy. As I walked back to my seat, Emma giggled from her chair near the front row. I had said something about Charlotte's childhood habit of hiding snacks in her pillowcase, and it struck Emma as hilarious. She laughed out loud, high, bright, unfiltered, a sound of pure delight. In any other setting, it would have made people smile. But in that vineyard hall, among linen napkins and string music, it landed like a firecracker in a library. My father turned toward the sound. He was sitting 2 tables ahead, surrounded by Charlotte's new in-laws, looking very proud of the formal dinner program he'd helped arrange. His jaw tightened. I saw his nostrils flare. He stood up. At first I thought he was going to say something to the waitstaff, but no, he turned toward Emma, eyes sharp. In 3 slow, controlled steps, he reached her table. I stood too. Something in me stirred an instinct I hadn't needed in years. Emma, he said, his voice low but not gentle. We use indoor voices especially at grown-up events. She looked up at him, still smiling, but unsure. I'm sorry, Grandpa. Mommy made a funny joke. Before I could get to her, he raised his hand. It wasn't a full slap, but it was a movement I recognized. A flick of the wrist that said discipline. A gesture so deeply ingrained in his posture, it felt automatic. He didn't strike her, not yet, but his hand was in the air, and the message was clear. I crossed the floor in seconds. My hand met his wrist midair. No, I said, firm and loud. The music had stopped, forks stilled, glasses hung in midair. A frozen second passed in which everything became very, very quiet. She's a child, I said, not lowering my voice, and she laughed. That's not a crime. He looked at me with that cold, controlled expression I'd known since childhood. You're making a scene, he said through his teeth. You were about to hit my daughter, I replied, in front of a live microphone. Behind us, the DJ system was still powered on. One of the reception microphones was still active. A videographer, young and startled, instinctively turned his camera in our direction. Several people had their phones out already. Emma sat frozen in her seat, her small hands folded in her lap, unsure of what to do. Her smile was gone. "You think I'd hit her?" he said, turning to the nearest guest as if collecting support. I was correcting her behavior. That's what parents and grandparents do. I stood between him and my daughter. "You don't get to raise your voice or your hand to her. Not ever. Not at a wedding, not at home, not anywhere." At that moment, my mother appeared beside him, placing a hand on his arm. "Let's not ruin Charlotte's day," she whispered urgently, her voice almost pleading. "It's already ruined," I said quietly. The room was still watching. People murmured softly now, unsure of whether to resume their drinks or stay in their seats. I took Emma's hand, and she rose without speaking. "We're going back to our room," I said. "Don't follow us." My father stared at me for a long moment, his lips pressed into a hard line. Then without another word he turned and walked back to his table. Charlotte stood near the back, framed by fairy lights and floral garlands. She didn't come over. She didn't call after us. Her face was unreadable. Back in our hotel room above the vineyard, Emma sat on the edge of the bed silent. I knelt down and helped her take off her shiny shoes. "Mommy," she asked after a few moments, "did I do something bad?" I looked at her, this child with so much brightness in her, and felt something in me splinter. "No, sweetie," I said, pulling her into my arms. "You didn't do anything wrong. You laughed because something was funny. That's what joy sounds like." "But Grandpa was mad," she whispered. "Sometimes grown-ups are wrong," I said. "Even people we're supposed to look up to." She nodded but looked unsure, the way I had once. I tucked her into bed and stepped into the hallway to catch my breath. A staff member passed by and paused. "Ma'am," he said softly. "Just so you know, the mics were live when that happened. The DJ didn't cut the sound." I stared at him, meaning I asked. "We heard everything. And it's all on the wedding video." I stood in the hotel hallway after the staff member left, heart pounding, his words echoing over and over in my mind. "It's all on the wedding video." The microphone had been on. The camera had been rolling. Every word my father's voice, the near slap my response, was preserved in high definition with professional audio and lighting. It was supposed to be a wedding memory. Instead, it had captured something raw and real, something no one could now pretend didn't happen. I returned to the room and sat at the edge of the bed. Emma was already asleep, one hand curled under her cheek, her breathing steady and slow. I watched her for a long time, thinking about the look on her face when she asked if she'd done something wrong, the shame she'd felt, the same shame I knew all too well. I picked up my phone and texted my best friend Heather. He raised his hand to Emma. "At the wedding." Mic was on, caught on video. Heather replied almost immediately, "Are you okay? Do you want me to come get you?" I looked around the room. White bed sheets, a decorative lamp, a view of the vineyard from the window. "No, I'll be okay for tonight. Just need to think. Let me know what you need." "Anything. I mean it." I thanked her and set my phone down. I needed space to breathe, to figure out what this moment meant, not just for me, but for my daughter. When we returned home the next day, I felt different. Tired, yes, but also alert. I couldn't fall back into routine, not after what had happened. I had been raised in a house where silence was currency and compliance was safety. But I had seen what that silence did to me. I saw it starting to reach for my daughter. I couldn't let it. The videographer reached out to me 2 days after the wedding. "I thought you should have a copy of this," he said over the phone. It captured more than I expected. I don't feel right keeping it without telling you." He sent me a private link. I opened it on my laptop while Emma played in the other room. I watched it once, then again, then a third time. It was even clearer than I remembered. You could see the expression on my father's face. You could hear Emma's laugh, so innocent, so full of life. You could hear the shift in the room when his hand went up, the tension, the silence, my voice strong but shaking. His response, "You're making a scene." The footage wasn't dramatic. No one screamed, no one cried, but it was enough. It told a truth that had been hidden in our family for decades. I downloaded the file and saved it in 2 separate folders. I didn't know what I was going to do with it yet, but I knew I couldn't delete it. That night, Emma had trouble sleeping. She kept asking for the hallway light to be left on. She didn't want the door fully closed. When I asked why, she said softly, "What if Grandpa comes over?" I reassured her again and again. He wouldn't. He didn't even know where we lived. I lied. But I knew the fear wasn't about geography. It was about trust, about what it meant when someone who's supposed to love you raises their hand and no one stops them. Except someone had stopped him, me. That mattered. Me. That. Even if it was late. Even if I had hesitated. It still mattered. The next morning, I reached out to the school counselor, Ms. Rivers, a kind, steady woman in her 50s who had worked with children for over 20 years. I didn't tell her everything, just that Emma had witnessed a moment of family aggression and seemed affected. "She's withdrawn," I said, a little anxious. "Doesn't want to sing or laugh as much lately." Ms. Rivers nodded. Sometimes even moments that don't seem major to adults can feel very big to a child. It's the emotional safety that gets shaken. She recommended a child therapist nearby. I made an appointment. Then I did something I'd never done before. I opened my laptop and wrote an email to my father. It wasn't long, just 4 sentences. "Dad, I'm sure you know by now that your actions at Charlotte's wedding were recorded. I want you to understand that I'm no longer willing to excuse behavior like that, especially not toward Emma. We are taking some time away from the family for now. I need you to know that what happened was not okay." He didn't reply. My mother called me the next day, voice tight and formal. "Rachel," she said, "I just want you to know your father feels terrible." I didn't say anything. "He didn't mean to actually hit her," she continued. "He was just trying to correct her manners. You know how seriously he takes public behavior." I exhaled through my nose, steadying myself. "She's 6, I said, and she laughed at something funny. If that's enough to deserve a slap, something is deeply broken." There was a pause. "Charlotte is upset," my mother said. "She said the video is being shared. Did you send it to anyone?" "No," I replied, "but I have a copy, and I'm not going to hide what happened. Not anymore. She's getting married. She doesn't need this kind of distraction." "I agree," I said. She didn't need to see her father try to hit a child at her wedding. That ended the call. I didn't send the video to the internet. I didn't publish it or blast it across social media. But I did send it to a few key people I trusted. Heather, Ms. Rivers, Emma's future first-grade teacher. I wasn't trying to shame my family. I was trying to protect my daughter. Then something unexpected happened. Charlotte called. "I need to see you," she said. We met at a coffee shop near her new apartment. She looked tired. Not wedding week tired, something deeper. "I watched the video," she said, sitting down. I waited. "At first, I wanted to be mad at you," she continued. "I wanted to believe you'd exaggerated. But I can't unsee it." I stayed quiet. "I remember when we were little." She said slowly, "How Dad used to yell at you for laughing too loud, for asking questions. I thought it was normal." "It wasn't," I said. "I see that now." She stirred her coffee without drinking it. "I've been thinking about the kids I want to have someday. I keep asking myself what I would have done if that had been my daughter. And I hope I would have done what you did." My eyes welled up, not with vindication, but relief. She reached across the table and took my hand. "I'm sorry I didn't step in. I should have said something." "You're saying it now?" I whispered. She squeezed my hand once before letting go. "I told Mom and Dad not to expect me at family dinners until they understand what they did." That was the twist I never saw coming. My sister, my golden sister, was choosing to stand beside me, not out of pity, but out of recognition. She had seen it now. The script had cracked. Maybe not everyone would turn away from silence, but she had. And that meant something was beginning to shift. 2 weeks after the wedding, I received an invitation. Not a phone call, not a conversation. An actual printed invitation delivered to my mailbox. "Family meeting, Sunday at 2:15 p.m. Palmer Residence. No explanation, no details. Just those 7 words printed in serif font on stiff white paper sealed in an envelope, with my father's handwriting on the front. I stared at it for a long time before setting it aside. I didn't respond. But 3 days later, Charlotte called. "I think you should come," she said. "I'm not sure I'm ready," I replied. "They're trying to save face." "Yes," she admitted. "But Grandma will be there. She's the one who pushed for it." That gave me pause. Our grandmother, Margaret Palmer, was 84 years old and hadn't left her home more than a dozen times in the last year. She had lived through too much and spoken too little, but when she did speak, everyone listened. So on Sunday at 1:45 p.m., I pulled into the driveway of my childhood home. Charlotte was already there waiting on the porch. She didn't say anything, just gave me a long, quiet look, then opened the door. The living room looked the same as always. Dark wooden furniture, lace curtains, a grandfather clock ticking methodically in the corner. It smelled faintly of furniture polish and old secrets. My mother stood in the doorway between the kitchen and dining room arms crossed tightly. My father sat in his leather recliner, legs crossed, reading glasses on the bridge of his nose. He didn't look up when I entered. And there, seated calmly on the floral sofa, was my grandmother. She wore her usual pearls, her silver hair pinned neatly at the back. Her cane rested against her knee, her gaze alert. I sat across from her, hands folded in my lap. "We're waiting for everyone," she said simply. Soon the room filled. My Uncle Martin, my Aunt Karen, a few cousins. No one spoke much. The air was thick. When the clock struck 2:00 p.m., Grandma cleared her throat. "I asked to speak with all of you today," she said, "because this family is standing on the edge of something dangerous." She looked at my parents. "I've been quiet for too long, and that ends today." My father shifted in his seat but said nothing. I watched the video. She continued. "Thomas, I saw your face. I heard your words. I saw your hand rise toward that little girl. My great-granddaughter." My father opened his mouth, but she raised one finger. He stopped. "I've seen that look before," she said. "On your father's face when you were a boy, and on yours over the years." I didn't say anything then, and I've regretted it every day since. She turned toward me. "Rachel," she said, "you did what I never had the courage to do. You stood between a child and harm. You changed the course." I felt my throat tighten. "I know the cost of silence," she said, "and I won't pay it anymore." Then she turned back to my father. "You owe her an apology. A real one." The room was so quiet I could hear the second hand on the clock tick. My father looked at me, really looked at me for the first time in years. There was no warmth in his eyes, but no contempt either. Only exhaustion. "I was wrong," he said finally. "I was angry, embarrassed, and I took it out on your daughter. That was unacceptable." The words fell heavily, as if dragged out of him. He didn't say he was sorry, but it was something. Then my mother spoke. "I thought I was keeping the peace," she said, "that if I stayed quiet, things would settle. But watching that video made me realize all I ever did was let harm keep happening. Rachel, I should have protected you when you were a child, and I didn't. I let it happen. And then I watched it almost happen again." Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't look away. "I am sorry," she said, voice cracking. "I am truly, truly sorry." I nodded once, slowly. "I believe you mean that," I said. "But I need to see it in your actions, not just your words." Charlotte leaned forward. "So do I," she added. My mother turned to her, surprised. Charlotte continued. "I've played along for years, pretended we were a perfect family. But I'm done with pretending. If this family wants to move forward, we need to rebuild it differently. We can't keep covering things up." Several other relatives nodded quietly. Then my father spoke again. "I don't know how to fix this," he admitted. "You start," I said softly, "by not controlling the narrative." He gave a tight nod. There were no hugs, no grand reconciliations. But something had shifted in the room. For the first time in my life, my truth had been spoken and received without dismissal. As I stood to leave, Grandma reached for my hand. Your daughter, she said, will grow up knowing she matters. That's the greatest legacy any mother can give. I squeezed her hand in return. Thank you, I whispered. Outside, the air felt lighter. Charlotte followed me out. We stood on the front steps together. Do you think they'll change? She asked. I don't know, I said, but I'm not waiting around to find out. I'll keep protecting Emma whether they come along or not. She nodded. Me too. We hugged for the first time in a long time. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. My parents didn't transform overnight, but the confrontation forced something open. And now there was space for something else to grow. Healing didn't happen all at once. There were no magical mornings where everything was fine again. No dramatic transformation. Just quiet, steady choices every day to build a different life for Emma and me. We returned to our usual routine. I went back to work at the school library. Emma started her summer reading club where she quickly became known as the kid who laughs at everything. It made the other kids laugh too. She still asked questions at night. Mommy, why did Grandpa get mad? Or will he ever try to come to our house each time I answered as gently and honestly as I could? Sometimes people think being serious means being strict, I explained. But being kind is more important. You don't need to be afraid. I won't ever let anyone hurt you. And she believed me. Slowly, I began to believe it too. I took her to her therapy sessions once a week. Her therapist, Dr. Elaine Shaw, had a warm voice and a room full of toys and books. At first, Emma didn't say much, but after the third session, she started opening up. She talked about being too much, Dr. Shaw told me. She thinks her laugh causes trouble. I felt that pang of guilt again, sharp and sudden. But she's also incredibly resilient, Dr. Shaw added. She's beginning to understand that it wasn't her fault. One afternoon, as we walked home from her appointment, Emma stopped on the sidewalk. Mommy, she said, can I laugh at silly things again? I knelt beside her. Yes, sweetheart, always. She smiled, a real open, toothy smile. And then she giggled about nothing in particular, just because. That sound, once silenced by shame, filled the air again. And I let it. I welcomed it. I also began seeing a therapist. It was long overdue. I don't know how to be angry without feeling guilty, I told her during our first session. She nodded knowingly. That's common when you grow up in a home where anger was punishment, not expression. We worked on untangling that, how I had learned to suppress, to minimize, to excuse. How protecting Emma had forced me to confront everything I'd avoided. You made a different choice, she told me. You broke the pattern. That's not small. I started journaling again, writing down what I wish someone had said to me when I was Emma's age. You're not too loud, you're not too sensitive, you don't have to earn love by being small. I wrote them, then read them aloud. Not for me, for Emma. Because children don't become resilient by being hardened. They become resilient when they are safe, seen, and loved. I didn't see my parents again for several months. Charlotte kept in touch. She invited us over for quiet Sunday lunches. Emma helped her bake cookies. We didn't talk about the wedding or our father, but we didn't avoid it either. One day, Emma asked if she could sing something she learned in music class. Of course, Charlotte said. I'd love that. Emma stood in Charlotte's living room holding a wooden spoon like a microphone and sang a song about sunflowers and summer and being brave. Her voice was strong, unapologetic, and I cried. Not out of sadness, but because I knew we were okay. Maybe not perfect, maybe not completely healed, but okay. We were building something new. It's been nearly a year since the wedding. I no longer measure time in months or seasons. I measure it in small moments. Emma's first day of first grade, the day she sang at the school assembly without hesitation, the morning she told me I was the bravest mommy she knew. Our apartment feels warmer these days, not just because of the sunlight, but because of the peace, the absence of tension, the way Emma laughs freely again, the way I no longer flinch when the phone rings wondering if it's my parents calling to minimize, to explain, to excuse. They still reach out now and then. My mother sent a card last month with a picture of her holding a sunflower, the words "thinking of you" written in her neat cursive. I appreciated the effort, but I didn't respond. Charlotte and I talk more than we ever did growing up. She comes over for dinner, brings puzzles for Emma, tells stories about her work. She's softened somehow. Or maybe I've just let myself see her for who she is, rather than who our parents wanted us to be. We still haven't spoken publicly about what happened that day. There's no need. The truth already made its way out. The silence was broken. That was enough. Sometimes I think about the version of myself who would have stayed quiet, the girl who would have apologized for making a scene, who would have taken Emma aside afterward and said next time try to be quieter, who would have folded herself back into her place just like I was taught. But that's not who I am anymore. The day I caught my father's wrist, I didn't just protect Emma. I reclaimed something I'd lost a long time ago. My voice, my right to set boundaries, my right to protect joy, especially when it shows up in the form of a laughing child. I can't rewrite my past, but I can shape my daughter's future. A few weeks ago, Emma brought home a picture she'd drawn at school. It was of me and her standing in front of a big yellow house with the words "My Safe Place" written at the top. I asked her what it meant. She said it means I can be me and it's always okay. That's what I wanted all along. Not revenge, not validation, just that. A world where my daughter feels safe to laugh, to sing, to be heard, to take up space. And if it took a wedding, a microphone, and a long overdue confrontation to get there, then maybe that day wasn't a disaster. Maybe it was the beginning.